The lesson from the Israel-Iran/US situation is going to make the Chinese think twice about being more belligerent on the military side.
In this episode, I'm sitting down with Kyle Bass, founder and chief investment officer of Heyman Capital Management, to get an update on how China is faring since we last spoke 5 months ago.
There's nothing that's going to bail China out of their economic spiral. We're having a real estate crisis, a banking crisis, a youth unemployment crisis, and now they need to be worried about their current account.
How have the Trump administration's policies and recent events affected China and its economy? And how have they impacted the Chinese regime's ambitions for Taiwan?
And when China moves on Taiwan, the world will further bifurcate. And I think we all need to be planning for that day.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Kyle Bass, so good to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Glad to be here, Jan.
So Kyle, it's kind of a historic day. The beginnings of some kind of ceasefire between Iran and Israel. It seems it's already broken, but maybe not entirely. I get the sense that things are being worked out. What brought this about immediately, in the most immediate sense, was these bombings of the Iran nuclear sites. And it seemed like you had a lot of certainty when I was following your feed that about the fact that this was actually going to happen over the weekend. So maybe if you could kind of explain to me why you understood that this was actually happening, because there was an unbelievable amount of speculation, if I recall.
Yeah, I think, Jan, when you saw it was noted that we moved 30 refueling tankers into the region. We have 2 carrier strike groups there, and we were supposed to have 0. And we've been talking about taking this shot at sending their nuclear program back at least a decade, if not longer. And, when we developed these GBU-57 bombs, we actually, under President Obama, we built these bombs for this mission. That bomb was built for that mission. And so we knew at some point in time that we were going to have to take this shot, because the world can't afford for a madman like Khamenei and his mullahs to have a nuclear weapon. They've told you what they're going to do with it. And so, it took real leadership, but it also took the ingenuity and the grit of the Israelis to remove all of Iran's air defenses. So think about this. Syrian airspace is open. Iranian anti-aircraft facilities have been taken down. And so this was our red carpet golden ticket to go take that shot. And the IAEA had just said that for the first time in 22 years that Iran had enriched far past the agreed upon 4 or 5%. And they were to a highly enriched uranium status, which of course means we believe they could field 14 or 15 bombs. We got to a point where we had to go. And, President Trump did it right. He said, look, if you surrender and allow full inspections of your facilities and us to come in and take over your facilities, then we won't blow them up. But, you saw what Khamenei said, and you saw what the other leaders of the IRGC said. And so, again, we had to do this. It's like when the Russians moved the blood banks to the border, and the New York Times said, well, I think they're just saber rattling. No, when you move blood banks and you move tankers, you're going. It's just a matter of when. How quickly are you going to go? It's my opinion that it was going to happen immediately, given the movements of our military assets. I certainly did not know, but it was a decent guess.
Well, and it's as we're seeing, and sort of in the aftermath of this initial ceasefire and a plan for a peace negotiation, it's still fraught, it's still volatile. There's, of course, a lot of actual uncertainty, or do you view it that way?
Yeah, look, it pays all of us to really take note of all of the inputs here. And we're not just talking about the fundamental radical Islamic and Shia inputs of the Iranian regime. I'm talking about the financial inputs of the Middle East kind of writ large. But let's talk about Iran. Iran's currency was pegged at 42,000 to the dollar for the longest time. And as of May, the Iranian central bank has moved that to 520,000 of the dollar. So 42,000 to 520,000. If you had any savings at all in the Iranian currency, it is gone. The black market rate's somewhere around 950,000 to the dollar. You have to go back to COVID. When the US expanded the Fed's balance sheet from 4 trillion to 9 trillion in a very short period of time, for the first time ever. Remember, the US Fed's balance sheet never had been above 1 trillion in its history before 2009. So from 2009 to 2022, we took our balance sheet from sub 1 to 9 trillion. And there's a multiplier effect there in the Fed. I think we pushed roughly 50% dollar inflation to the world between 2020 and 2023 during the virus from Wuhan. And I think that in that time frame, the rest of the world has what I call a negative convexity to us. So everything in the world is priced in dollars. So when you look at cross-border currency settlements and you think, well, there's the dollar, the euro, the yen, the pound, there are all these other currencies. There really isn't. There's just the dollar. And the other currencies are back solved for how they pay for things in their own country. That's really the way the world works. So when we push 50% inflation in dollar terms to the world, many of the countries that were kind of bouncing along the bottom or having trouble growing, they inflated more than we did. They had a negative convexity to our push. So when you look at Turkey, 90 million people, you look at Iran, you look at Pakistan, you look at Lebanon, literally the list goes on and on and on. Between 2020 and 2025, they've hyperinflated. Their currencies are now worthless. So for anyone that begins one of these foreign policy arguments with, well, ceteris paribus, all else being equal, well, we should be able to get to a ceasefire. There's no ceasefire happening on. There's nowhere to go back to. There is financial ruin everywhere because there is no stability anywhere in the world other than in the dollar. And we just experienced that 50% inflation in both the US and Europe. So you and I both know things are much more expensive today than they were pre-COVID, right? So the whole world is destabilizing. Inflation is an insidious destabilizing force that I'm not sure people connect the dots between inflation and the stretching or tearing of the social fabric, either domestically or internationally. And so when you have a look at the Middle East kind of writ large, there is no going back to kind of 2.5% global growth. Everybody figures out how to get along and we're just going to go to a ceasefire. My view is the ground war in Europe. I don't believe there's an off-ramp there. What are we going to go sign another Munich deal Munich agreement where, we kind of give Russia their advances and hope Putin doesn't push further? Putin has told us he wants all of the Ukraine. I mean, if Trump himself, the deal maker, can't get a deal done with Putin, then no one can get a deal done with Putin. That's the way I look at it. Like, Trump's really good at making deals. He can't make a deal there. And so you have the ground war in Europe. You have the Iran and its illegitimate proxies against Israel and maybe the rest of the West, who knows? And now you have China and Taiwan. And, you saw what happened in Taiwan over the weekend. Like, again, things aren't going well. And when China moves on Taiwan, the world will further bifurcate. And I think we all need to be planning for that day. The rapidity with which Israel and the United States let's just say Israel has been able to take Iran apart. And they've done it so brilliantly and so with such precision that I think it certainly not only got China's attention, I bet it unmoored China's views of warfare, and especially what happened with the U.S. I mean, when you really understand what happened at Fordow and Natanz, I mean, we had to drop those bombs down 3 ventilation shafts that had been covered up by the mountain. So they had built the shafts, then they had covered them with earth, and we had to drop them with precision down those 3 shafts from whatever altitude we dropped those giant bombs from. And we did it. We still have the best and most lethal military in the world, and we aren't afraid to use it. And I think leading through strength is a new deterrent for the relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan. You've seen the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Sam Paparo, say publicly, if China thinks they're going to either blockade or attack Taiwan, we will create a hellscape in the Taiwan Strait. So I think you see unambiguous messages from our leadership, even from President Biden 4 separate times, saying we would certainly defend Taiwan. I don't know what Xi Jinping's calculus is there. We're not dealing with someone that's rational. We're dealing with somewhat of a madman, just like we're dealing with the madman in Putin, and we're dealing with the madman in the Ayatollah, and we're dealing with the madman in Kim Jong-un, and all the madmen are signing deals together and doing deals together. It's a pretty fraught time, but I think the lesson from the Israel-Iran / U.S. situation in Iran is going to make the Chinese think twice about being more belligerent on the military side with Taiwan.
Kyle, we're going to take a quick break right now, and folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with Kyle Bass, founder and chief investment officer of Heyman Capital Management. There seems to be a scenario of increased stability, like kind of an expanded Abraham Accords being able to happen. But you're basically saying that the financial volatility and this inflation that's been pushed is actually going to negate that effect. Do I understand that?
What I'm saying is the countries that are most ill affected, like Iran, like Iraq, which is being run, as a proxy by the Iranians and by the Shias, and the unstable regions of the Middle East will stay unstable. I think the stability of the relationship with Saudi, the UAE, and the U.S. is the best it's been since pre-Biden. I mean, as we all know, the Biden administration decided to turn their back on the Saudis, our longest standing ally in the Middle East, and give the bear hug to the Iranian regime and release the capital to them. I mean, that was the most ill-fated, poor decision maybe that Biden made in his, well, I don't know who made it. Maybe he made it, maybe someone else did. But that administration made a really, really poor decision from a foreign policy perspective with alienating or turning our back on Saudi and embracing the largest sponsor of terror in the world. And I think we have now righted that ship. So I do think when you look at the UAE growing north of 5%, when you look at Saudi and our newfound strong relationship again with Saudi, and you see very specifically the UAE in Q1 of 2024 said they were going to pivot away from China and that they were going to focus on the U.S. And you see the UAE embracing Europe and the U.S. You see Saudi embracing Europe and the U.S. And the Chinese had really taken our about face in the Middle East and leveraged it. And so let's hope the U.S. relationships with the Saudis and the Emiratis continue to prosper. But what I'm saying is the Shias in Iran, in Lebanon, and then the people of Pakistan and the governments that are being run by theocratic madmen are really going to have a tough time moving forward, Jan. There's almost no safe harbor here to reconstruction unless you embrace this concept of some concept of semblance of Western democracy and call it logical rule. If you go back to the theocratic, roots, you're certain to fail.
So let's talk about the changes in the Chinese economic reality since we spoke 5 months ago. It seems like there's been a lot of interest in that discussion. And I'd like to build on that because actually quite a lot has happened. I mean, this whole, tariff regime, but let's go back to just what's been happening with the Chinese economy, even pre-Trump tariffs.
Yeah. So look, the Chinese economic situation is they're dealing with the largest economic crisis they've ever had. They've really only been at banking since their ascension into the WTO, 2002-ish. So we're talking a little over 2 decades. And I give the analogy, we've been at banking for well over a century, and look at how bad we got it in 2008. Imagine if our system was more than 2 times levered than it was going into 2008, because that's what we're looking at China. we were on balance sheet about 1 times levered to our GDP. So the banks' assets were about 1 times GDP. If you included the non-banks, the Fannies, the Freddies, and the non-banks, it was about 1.7. The Chinese are at 3.2 today on balance sheet. And then you also have another $14 trillion market in the local government financing vehicles, how they finance themselves. When you look at total debt to GDP, China's the worst offender in the world. So they've got more debt than they know what to do with. They've got their 10-year bonds trading at 160. They've got their overnight rates about 150. And ours are what? 440 on the 10-year and call it 430 overnight. So the Chinese government is pretty good at lying about whatever they want to lie about. But the bond market kind of tells the truth. And the bond market's telling you that China's in an economic winter. And now you have a tariff situation. The only bright spot in China's economy was their trade surplus. They ran about a $980 billion trade surplus last year. And $360 billion of that was from the US. So what's functionally relevant is when you think about trade surpluses, that's kind of one component to China Inc.'s net income. So when you think about a country, a sovereign, if you try to think about it or hypothesize it as a corporate entity, you have a few things, right? To creating your net income will be various components of your revenues, and one of their revenues is the trade surplus. One of their outflows or subtractors is the foreign direct investment and portfolio flows. So those can all be positive, or some can be positive and negative. So when you look at China in 2024, they had a trade surplus of 980 billion, but they only had a current account surplus, call it a net income number, of about 520 billion. So they lost, 400 something billion. So they lost about 500 billion in outflows. So even though they had a massive trade surplus, and their surplus was up 22% from the year before, up in 1 year, they ran their surplus up 22% greater. But they also had a massive FDI and portfolio flow outflow. So why tariffs matter, Jan? If they ran roughly it's about a $420 billion current account surplus. If we bring into question 360 billion of that surplus by putting restrictive tariffs on our trade, we can take their current account almost to zero. If you think about that more broadly. So we are 360 of 980, but we are also 360 of the 420. So China's one bright spot is now in question. As you've probably seen, year over year, trade with the US is down about 35%. I actually am surprised it's not down more, but down 35% is pretty material with our trade relationship. So given all of those inputs, Jan, what I'm telling you is there's nothing that's going to bail China out of their economic spiral. They're having a real estate crisis, a banking crisis, a youth unemployment crisis, and now they need to be worried about their current account.
And just, for the record, you say that the debt to GDP is the worst in the world. Can you just lay out the components of that, the debt that you're talking about?
So when you look at on-balance sheet sovereign debt, and then you add in the local government financing debt, we also give them the benefit of the doubt of conversion into the dollar at a fictitious rate, meaning a rate where they have a closed capital account. We kind of give them that conversion for kind of gratis. We don't discount that at all. Chinese on-balance sheet debts to GDP are roughly 350%. I mean, again, a number that's so difficult to deal with, especially when you're having an economic crisis. So on-balance sheet, when you're talking about yuan-based debt, like you're seeing in their banking system and in their local government financing vehicles that aren't dollar denominated, what you can do is you can just print the yuan, right? You can print a lot of them. You can abandon moral hazard and plug those holes. So what you're seeing happen in that market, the PBOC announced that they're going to put in place refinancing vehicles for about $1.6 trillion worth of the, call it $14 trillion market. So more than 10% of the market, and it hasn't helped that market at all, which is fascinating.
At the same time, there are still these deep international connections, and I believe that this has indeed been Communist China's project to basically insinuate itself into the global economy. If we go down, we're taking you down with us, kind of idea, right? I don't know what you think about that.
This is this concept of they're so economically interconnected that basically they're too big to fail, and more importantly, that because we're so economically dependent on one another for various things, that we'll never have a conflict. I mean, how many times did you read that going into World War I and World War II? That was the talking heads were saying there's no way we can actually go into a war. The world's too economically interdependent. We'll never have another big one. And I hear that again. I hear that chorus repeating yet again, and yet we actually share almost nothing in common with the Chinese Communist Party. We look at the world completely differently. We value basic human rights. We value the right to own real estate. We value law and order. We value so many things here that they just have no concept of over there. Everything is at the benefit and for the benefit of the party chairman Xi Jinping himself. So it's a very different world, and when we don't share values and all we share are kind of economic leanings, and we have outsourced just about everything to China, there's a world in which the U.S. can actually turn that around and bring some of that manufacturing back onshore, which I think is certainly going to happen. And I think the world's going to just be a different place. Just imagine if Xi Jinping were to leave Taiwan alone, how much better the world would be. If there was no threat or fear of a kinetic conflict with two of the world's nuclear superpowers, I think we would all sleep better at night. But in the end, Xi Jinping has told us since 2017 that he's going to do this. And we have to be worried about it. And we should be concerned. And we should also take him for his word. He said it enough times for me to believe it. And at some point in time, he's going to go. And, he's told the PLA Navy and the PLA Army that to be ready by 2027. And so here we are in June of 25. I mean, 27 is pretty close.
Well, the other thing that strikes me here, Kyle, is, internal change, right? There's Iranian people certainly are no fans of the mullahs. And that's certainly been something I've seen. The Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, talking about basically speaking to the Iranian people. There's the quit the CCP movement in communist China. Over 400 million people have done that. Again, sort of peaceful, possible routes to peaceful change, positive change. Is that what's
that is the hope of all of us, right? I mean, if you have Khomeini fall and you have a pragmatist come into play in Iran, and you have the fall of the Communist Party, and you have anyone that wants to engage in some sort of Western capitalism and democracy, or at least some semblance of it, that would be the best possible thing for the world.
Kyle, final thought as we finish?
That's all I got today, Jan.
All right. Well, Kyle Bass, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.